another episode of the Studio 78 podcast. I am your host, Nache from NacheSnow.com. Welcome. You can find the show notes for this page at NacheSnow.com/63. I've got a lot of amazing links from Mallory, so be sure to go over there and check it out. Before we get to Mallory, of course, just a couple of admin things. If you haven't already, on iTunes, if you go over there and rate me 5 stars real quick, I'd really appreciate it. If you're on YouTube, if you'd subscribe and give the thumbs up, and whatever else you might be listening on, if you heart me on Spotify or rate me on Stitcher, that also helps too. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who sent me personal messages and who shared the past couple of episodes from season 3, because it's reflected in the numbers. I can see the numbers going up every week. So you all are definitely enjoying the content. And so I'm really, really excited about that, and that I have a lot more new listeners. So yay. Thank you. All right. So I have another amazing guest this week. Her name is Mallory Whitfield, and she has her own personal brand, and the website is missmalaprop.com. All the links that I mentioned will be in the show notes, but she teaches people how to creatively market themselves online and how to tap into their creative potential. And she also is the host of the Badass Creatives podcast too. So I wanted her on here, even though she is a SEO and social media guru, but to talk about like the decision she's made through the years to shift her business. Because a lot of times I try to give you guys like that practical branding advice and marketing advice, but I also want to make sure this season that you guys have a good understanding of when it's okay to pivot. So I've even entitled this Quit, Stick, or Pivot, because sometimes you have to realize, and she talks about this with wanting initially to have a brick and mortar store, but then she realized that that wasn't for her. So sometimes you have to like not literally quit, but just stop with an idea. Sometimes you have to stick with something, even though it might seem hard. And sometimes your just passions shift, and maybe it's time for a pivot within your career or your business. And so in this episode, we kind of get at all of those different things and how she's done that through the years with her career. I also love that she still at different points in her journey had a day job, because I don't want in any way to make it seem like you can or that you have to quit your job to do something that you're passionate about. Sometimes you can have the best of both worlds. Sometimes it works out for you to quit and do your thing full time, but you just need to make the decision that's best for you. So, in this episode, we talk about why she decided to have sometimes a full time or a part time job in different points, why she pivoted in her business. Like MissMalaprop.com is very different than it was in 2014, and what she's focusing on now and why. And then, like, towards the end, too, we get into all the different ways she's like diversifying her income through affiliate marketing, teaching, speaking, and self-publishing. So with this episode, I really just wanted to just walk you guys through someone's journey that has changed multiple times, but they're still doing what they're passionate about and they're building on it. So I am excited to hear what you guys think, and let's get to it. Hello, Mallory. Welcome to the Studio 78 podcast.
Hello, thank you.
Yes, I wanted to get all up in your business and how you're helping fellow creatives. You're just doing like some amazing things. Before we get into that, can you just tell the listeners a little bit about your background before you started Badass Creatives?
Yeah, so my name's Mallory Whitfield. I live in New Orleans. I grew up on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, but I've born in New Orleans and been here since 2002 or so. And I've been creative in some capacity my entire life. I was always making things as a kid and kind of grabbing adults around and performing for them. And I went to college, originally started out as like a theater major and kind of ended up hating doing the thing that I was creatively inclined to do in a formal school setting and ended up not even graduating with a theater minor. I ended up graduating with a history degree. And I thought
Oh.
that I wanted to be a costume and textile curator at a museum because I've always loved fashion and clothing and costumes. And my very last couple of classes at Loyola University, I went to London and studied for a month abroad there. And I managed to go to the Victoria and Albert Museum, which if you ever go to London, you have to go to the
Mm.
V&A. It's an amazing museum. And I got to meet one of the costume curators there. She took me behind the scenes and it was so amazing. But there was something in our conversation where she basically said, something to the extent of like, I wish that I had gone into fashion design instead of working like behind the scenes. And during that same
Oh.
trip, yeah, so during that same trip, like I was also going to all of these amazing markets around London. So there's Portobello Market, which was incredible. And there's vintage stuff and antiques, but then there's also all these amazing artists who are selling their own stuff that they've made. So I got really excited. And I think that trip was sort of this like aha, life changing moment for me. So when I got back to New Orleans, I started selling stuff at art and craft shows. Like I'd been making stuff on my
Mm.
own. I would take old denim, like acid wash jeans from the 80s and write Shakespearean sonnets in Sharpie marker all over them just for myself. And I'd have teachers who were like, you should sell those. Like you should totally make money off of those. But it wasn't until I came back from London that I finally tried to start doing it. So
Mm.
basically 2004 was the beginning of me doing art and craft shows, and it was a lot of one of a kind handmade stuff, upcycled denim skirt or denim jeans into skirts and t-shirts into dresses, or all these like very one of a kind things. And so I did that for a while, and then Hurricane Katrina happened in 2005.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think kind of just like the age and the point in life that I was at, and that sort of like made me sort of reevaluate like priorities and what my vision was. And so 2006 or so, I realized I really had this dream of opening a retail store, both e-commerce and like a brick and mortar store that people could come shop in for handmade products, similar to the
Mm.
ones I was making, but I wanted to carry other people's stuff as well. So there was this whole like indie craft movement exploding that, it's kind of underground, but it was something that was super near and dear to my heart because it was the thing that I did. And I saw other people all over the country and the world doing it too.
Mm.
And so I wanted to be able to share those people's work as well. And so I realized like it was probably going to be crazy of me to go out and get a giant bank loan and spend a lot of money to just like start a store. So I
Yeah,
decided
it's
to,
expensive.
yeah, and I had to talk myself off of that ledge of doing that like multiple times, but I never went ahead and did it, luckily. But I decided to start a brand, like building an audience first. And so
Mm.
that's when I started my website, which still exists in a much different form, missmalaprop.com.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
started that site and I kind of made it a big deal. I like sent out a press release locally and
Oh.
nationally, like I'm starting this site for like eco-friendly products and handmade products. And basically I was curating and sharing the kind of stuff that I wanted to have in my store eventually, but just doing it via a blog and just spotlighting other artists. And I got some pretty cool press pretty early on, and there wasn't as many bloggers as there are now. It was kind of a
Right.
a much like wider space for me to jump into. So yeah, I did that. And then 2007, Etsy, which was also really early stage still, they had this contest for
Oh, yeah.
upcycling where you would take like something that would normally be thrown away and then turn it into something amazing.
Mm.
So I made this outfit out of FEMA blue tarp, the tarps that were on all the roofs down here on the coast and in New Orleans. So I
Oh,
made this
yeah.
outfit and it won third place in their nationwide competition. So
Oh,
then that went,
wow.
yeah, it was really exciting. So that went like kind of viral online. And I got to go to Maker Faire in San Francisco that year. And then I got to hang out at Etsy's offices that summer for a trunk show that they did there. And so, yeah, it was like all this cool stuff was happening. In the midst of it, though, I was still like working a combination for many years of like part-time jobs and full-time jobs and doing the side hustle thing and kind of like trying to build my audience and build my business and figure all this stuff out.
Mm.
And at some point I scaled it up. Like I got the e-commerce store running, and then I cut back on my day jobs, or I was only doing day job stuff like part-time to kind of cover the bills. And then I was doing art markets like 4 nights a week.
Oh, wow.
We had this market here in New Orleans that popped up called the Frenchman Art Market, that was an evening market, so like 6 p.m. till 1 a.m. or something. And there was these beautiful string lights, and right down where everybody goes to the bars and the jazz clubs on Frenchman Street. So we got a lot of tourists and stuff. And I was doing that for like 4 nights a week for at least a year or two, probably.
Sounds cool. Exhausting, maybe, but cool
Yeah,
too.
it was both. It was both. And it was a great learning experience to have the products that I was selling like in front of people and getting feedback from lots of different types of people all the time. But then, yeah, I got burnt out because it was really exhausting. It's like very like physical, because I couldn't leave my stuff set up all the time. I had to break the booth down every single day and put it back up. And
Oh,
we dealt with
right.
weather and all this stuff. Um, and then also I had another one of those aha moments, like right around the time that I was probably starting to get burnout on this anyway. My sister and I took my mom on a trip to Ireland, and
Oh.
we thought that she was losing her vision, and luckily it sort of stabilized and everything. But we had this moment where like, we have to bring you to see Ireland before maybe you can't see it anymore. And she has a business that it's a outdoor flea market. So she rents booth space out to the flea market vendors. And the whole time that we were in Ireland, I just felt like she was so worried about her business back home. And I had this realization that like, I don't want to be tied to a location-based business like a retail
Mm.
store.
Yeah.
So yeah, I sort of like had that second aha moment. And then later that year, this was like around 2013, I was sort of like, okay, now what do I do? Like this dream that I had forever is
It's like
not,
time to pivot, right?
I was like, what do I do? But I started to realize over the course of running my blog and marketing and building this audience, like I really enjoyed the marketing aspects. I had taught myself all about search engine optimization and all of the social media channels as they sort of started to exist. I would hop on each one and figure it out. And blogging and content marketing and email marketing, I sort of taught myself all this stuff, and I found it to be really creative and interesting. I sort of, even now, like I'll treat my own websites like a sandbox and like, let me see how I can increase traffic to this blog post or do this thing or whatever. And so luckily I'd made connections with some people at a local digital marketing agency through a conference I'd been involved with. And they had a job opening at the end of the year for like a part-time position for a search engine optimization coordinator. And I applied for it, and I got the part-time job. So started there early 2014, and then they very quickly asked me to be full-time. So then I was like,
Mm.
okay, this is what I do now. And then I started there, and at the time they had this program called Empowerment, where they would teach small business owners how to do what we did. So teach them about search engine optimization and social media and all this stuff. And I realized
Mm.
like I was really good at explaining these technical things and making them simple. And I really
Mm.
enjoyed it. I grew up doing
Mhm.
theater, but it'd been forever since I'd like really like performed or kind of, taught or anything. People always, like my friends told me I should be a teacher and teach people this stuff. But I always resisted it. I was like, no, it comes so easily to me, and I'm not going to have the patience to like explain it to somebody else because I just figure it out. But
Right.
when I was forced to do it through a job, it actually turned out that I was pretty good at it and I liked it.
Well, I would think like your performance background would help too, because I think a lot of times people have a hard time keeping people engaged, right? Like it's like they want to learn something, but you have to be creative in the way you teach it. But I don't know. It seems like performance arts would allow you to be like a better storyteller in a way.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I've really come to realize, and I'm still trying to figure out how to weave that in even further, like, 4 years later, whatever it is now.
Hmm.
So, yeah, it's just funny because 2014 ended up being like another aha sort of transformational year for me. So I started this new job at this marketing agency. I started teaching people, the social media, the digital marketing. And then that summer, I sort of got back into performance again for the first time in like a decade. So I grew up and
Ah.
I was always interested in drag queens ever since I knew that they were a thing and that drag existed. Like my favorite movie of all time is The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, which is an Australian movie where it's very similar to Tu Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, which is a direct ripoff of the original. But so I've always been obsessed with drag queens, and I've met this artist, Vin Santos, who had moved here to New Orleans from San Francisco a few years before that. He did the art markets with me. Like we would sit out at Frenchman Art Market and do the art markets because he sold these amazing mixed media art dolls. But he's also a drag performer. And when he first moved to New Orleans, he had a lot of trouble finding drag shows that really were a good fit for him because his style coming from San Francisco is very different than a lot of the traditional kind of drag that exists here. Like drag can be very regional in the way, it's not
interesting.
the same everywhere in the world necessarily, like anything else, like music or food or whatever.
Yeah.
So he started this thing called the New Orleans Drag Workshop, and I ended up getting involved in cycle 2. They're up to about cycle 8 right now. I think they're about to start. So I got involved in cycle 2. So it was basically like an 8-week workshop, and it's very performance based. Like he's very much about the performance. And then we also learned about makeup and, like how to like contour and change what you look like through makeup and through like padding, like hip padding and butt pads and fake boobs and, or like, whatever, and the costumes and all these other things. So I did the New Orleans Drag Workshop that summer the 2014. And that same summer, like right as I had signed up for it, and I was so excited to start doing something theatrical again, this very close friend of mine, Veronica Russell, who was 44 at the time, I think. So she was also super involved in theater. I had met her. We worked together for a long time and did projects, but she was an actress and a playwright and a costume designer and did all this amazing stuff.
Oh, wow.
And so she was actually going to be working on making me a David Bowie costume. And then she messages me around this same time in the summer because she was like, I found out that I have, I think it was cervical cancer or ovarian cancer, one of the two, I can't remember. So she had cancer. She was like, I'm going to go in, have the surgery. No big deal. I'll get your costume done. No problem.
Oh my God. I know you were like, that's okay. Yeah.
She's like the most badass person ever. Like, so like the most insanely creative and badass person. So, and that's seriously like how she responded to the whole thing. And she was also like, don't tell a lot of people. I'm trying to like not make a big deal about it, sort of thing. I'm just telling people because we were already talking about this costume and I want you to know like what's up. And, we were close friends. And then within a couple of weeks, she ended up having not 1, but 2 strokes and then was put in hospice and then was gone. And so it was like all these things happened this one year. Like I started this new job and this new transition into teaching and speaking and finding that. And I lost this amazing person who was such a creative inspiration. And I think because I had just started the drag workshop and was getting back into performance for the first time in like a decade, I took that experience and I definitely cried when we lost her, but I tried to like live the way that I know that she did and the way that she, I think, would have wanted me to do, and to try to like be like her about the whole situation. So I really sort of found my muse in her since she's passed. Yeah. And so I did this drag workshop and then I actually performed on Bourbon in a drag club. I was the only like cisgendered female to do like drag performance in that club for a couple of months for tourists that got really confused, and it was kind of amazing. So yeah, like I got back into doing like performance and everything. And then so over the last couple of years, that's what I've really sort of realized. I was like, oh, professional speaking is a thing, like that this can be my sort of career path and my goal. So I've been moving towards more teaching because I really love teaching the people like me, like the artists and the creatives, and helping them to figure out like how to market their services so that they can make more money doing what they love. And so that they don't have to make the same mistakes that I made the hard way. Cause I made so many stupid mistakes over the years. Like I accidentally deleted my entire website from the FTP when I was in the back end of it.
Which I can see how that can happen though. I totally can see how that can happen.
Yeah. And I had like, websites getting hacked because I didn't know any better. Like nobody told me certain things that I needed to do to prevent that from happening. So because of me learning a lot of stuff the hard way on my own, that's one of the reasons that I'm really passionate about teaching other creatives and small business owners and helping them understand the tech side of things, because I feel like people get so intimidated by a lot of the tech stuff like search engine optimization or building their website or whatever. And y'all, we have it so much easier than when I started. Like I was having this
Oh, so
conversation
they've
with
got
my
Squarespace and Shopify. I mean, yeah, I remember like having to code stuff, I don't know, 13, 14 years ago with like HTML and yeah, I'm like, it's so much easier now.
yeah, that's the thing. I'm always like, yeah, if you're not unless you're a super tech savvy person and you really want to get into the back end of stuff, like pick a Squarespace website, or if you want to do e-commerce, do Shopify,
Yeah,
or like use the stuff that is here now. Like
right.
we have Square now. Like when I did the art market in those last few years, I got to run credit cards on that. But when I first started back in 2004, if I wanted to run credit cards, I had to have one of those like carbon copy, we called them a knuckle buster, where you like run the thing over the like credit card to like make the imprint, and then you had to take it all home and
Yes.
type it in, hope that nobody's credit card was like stolen or bad or anything. Like,
Right. Because I'm like, where did all these little receipts go?
yeah, like I always shredded them afterwards, but I'm sure not everybody did. Like it's kind of sketchy, like the stuff that we had to do back then.
But back then that was like the only thing you have, whereas now you have 10 different choices depending on like how fancy you want to get.
That can be overwhelming too. Like I think sometimes people can get into that analysis paralysis thing where there's
Right.
so many choices and they get in their own heads. I can definitely do that too. I was actually on a consulting call actually last night with a guy, and he was like, I'm great at giving advice to these other people, but then I feel like I can't do it for myself. And I was telling him, I'm like that too. Like, I
Yeah.
don't think there's anybody who's super successful that doesn't reach out at some point and have a coach or a mentor or a mastermind or whatever, because you sometimes need that outside perspective, even if it's the thing that you do,
Yeah.
to sort of point things out
Absolutely.
to you.
No, I completely agree because I was laughing with a friend the other week. I'm like, I feel like I'm giving everybody all this advice and then I see them do all these amazing things. I need to take my own advice. I was like, I need to do this and I need to do that. But I feel like sometimes it's easier to be like, oh, you need to just do this, this, and that. And it's so much harder to take a look at yourself and then take action based on that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I had this moment a couple of weeks ago. So there's this woman, Tanya Geisler, who does a lot of work around the imposter complex, which,
Mm.
I definitely identify with, and as I feel most like high performing women often do. She had this quiz, and it was like, which like manifestation does the imposter complex have for you? And like one of them was perfectionism, which is what I thought the one was going to be for me. But
Mm.
then it came back and it was procrastination. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's real. I definitely will find myself procrastinating, whether it's through like the analysis paralysis and trying to find the best, most perfect solution, which is kind of perfectionism, but like it's also kind of procrastination.
I try to get like a coach every year, and this year I had a coach. I think my problem is I want to do all the fun stuff. I'm like, I just want to record the podcast and videos and edit them and all that. And then she's like, but you need to market too, right? Yeah, but that's not as fun, you know?
Yeah. And I think so much of it is like figuring out what your own workflow is and like kind of how to hack yourself in that way. Because what works for me might not work for you, right? Like we're all built differently and we're all sort of motivated in different ways. Somebody else who I've sort of been inspired by is Gretchen Rubin has
Oh, yeah.
this whole thing about the four tendencies. I haven't read her book. She has a whole book about it, but I've heard podcasts where she explains it. And so mine is the questioner, like
Mm,
for sure. Basically, like I can be self motivated, but I also like I need to know why I'm doing something. So if it's something that like
mm,
requires somebody else, telling me that I need to do this thing, I gotta like I gotta have the buy in myself and understand that like I am doing this because I understand it and I agree with the reasons behind it first. So I think that's
right.
why sometimes I'll go down that rabbit hole of analysis paralysis a little bit. Like I gotta make sure that it's right before I can commit to then doing it. And then once I'm committed, I'll get it done.
Then it's no problem. Yeah, that same way. And then for you, so did you continue to work full time or at some point did you say like I'm going to go all in?
So the timing of this could not be better. So literally in the last like week and a half,
Oh, wow.
I've had, well, and it was like not, it was, this was not my choice, right? Because I would probably procrastinate forever because I'm like the procrastinator tendency. So I've had for the last almost year a full-time job. So
Mm,
when let me back up a little bit and just kind of walk through the last couple of years because it's gone in some like waves. So when I started this marketing agency in 2014, I started out there part-time just because that's what they had available. And then I was still doing art markets. And then they quickly kind of asked me to be full time because I was doing a great job. And then I was happy there as like a full time salaried employee for maybe like a year, year and a half or so.
mm.
And then I started to get that itch. I started to like see the people online selling the courses and saying that they were making six figures or whatever. And I was like, I'm
Right.
capable of doing that. Why aren't I making six figures from selling online courses? Surely I should do that.
I can do this. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I negotiated at that job to cut back to about 32 hours a week to basically take a 20% pay cut so that I could take a 20% time cut back for myself.
Mm.
And because I'd been such a great employee, they were willing to kind of make that exception and work with me on that because that wasn't like the normal thing. We had to work out
Mhm.
something special, but I negotiated to do that. So then I was using that extra day, and for a while it was like great. And then I was like, wait, I feel like I've been getting into the comparison trap and seeing these people online, and this is not actually the way that I want to do things.
Mm.
I actually really enjoy teaching in person, is what I've realized more recently, which is why I really want to pursue like professional speaking and doing more events and conferences and things like that, rather than
Mm.
prioritizing online courses specifically. I was doing the part-time thing at that day job and then kind of working on my own stuff. But then I started to like I wasn't really sure what my like business model was at that point near the end for my own stuff, and I was starting to get frustrated with that. And then I was also just plateauing at that digital
Mm.
marketing agency. I was one of the oldest people, even though I'll be like 35 at the end of this month. Just because it's social media, so there was a lot of people who were coming straight out of college and really young. So it was like there wasn't anybody for me to learn from or to be mentored by, and I was really finding myself wanting that. So I was
Mm.
getting frustrated and starting to kind of casually look for jobs. And then last summer, I did a speaking event. Actually, I was speaking to a group of women in technology locally about public speaking, about how to get more women on tech panels at conferences and things.
Mm.
And through that, it was hosted by this company that I've been working at this last year. And so they were like, "Oh, are you open to new positions, new jobs? Because our director of marketing just left." And they hadn't posted the job or anything yet. And I ended up talking to them and applying. And so I got this amazing director of marketing job. And I've been there this year or
Mm.
so, and it's been great. And I've created some amazing things. I got to help run this Women in Tech awards show and really take it to the next level last year, which was super exciting. And then a week or so ago, I've got some crazy news that the company is changing directions in a whole lot of ways. So I'm still not entirely sure what exactly is happening, honestly. By the time
Ah.
it comes out, touch base with me because who knows
Right.
what will have happened. Um,
Right.
but yeah, basically, no matter what, I'm going to end up in some sort of independent contractor position, either with them or working entirely for other people. So yeah,
Ah.
I think it's good though, because I think I was luckily already in a place of being open to change in my life. And so I think I've responded in a really positive way. And I'm seeing this as a door that I'm sort of being forcibly pushed through instead of taking probably what I would have ended up taking way too long to walk through on my own.
Mhm.
So I had some things already lined up. I'm this coming weekend as we're recording, I'm going to the National Speakers Association conference for the first time. That was already lined up. So I'm like, I have things that are here that are working towards the thing that I actually want to do. So I'm just going to dive into that and just trust that the universe will catch me.
So, question for you, and I don't even know if you've gotten this far because we're just like a week and a half in, but I know that this is a question people sometimes will ask me, and I'm like, "Ooh, I'm not sure." But, I know other people are looking to like maybe go full time, but they're like, but what about insurance? And what about 401k? And what about, so for you, have you started to kind of figure that out, or is that part of the plan this summer to see kind of like how all that's going to look?
Yeah. So I'm gonna have to figure that out. I'm still trying to even just figure out like what the independent contractor looks like for me right now, and like
Right.
how much money that's going to be a month, and how I'm going to pay my rent and buy food and stuff. But yeah, that will be like the second tier of priorities. Will be like, how am I going to make sure I have health insurance and those sorts of things? Because when I was at that agency previously, and I had negotiated to be the sort of like, I wasn't really an independent contractor. Like I kind of wasn't, because I had already been salary at that agency. So they let me keep my health insurance and kind of keep that as normal. But then instead of having a salary paycheck, it was like an hourly paycheck. So it
Oh.
was like a little bit of column A, column B when I was there. In the past, when I've been more like, I used to work at a retail store part time at a time when they didn't offer health insurance. And then like later they ended up offering health insurance as they grew. There were times where like I just didn't have health insurance and I just paid out of pocket. And honestly, like I said, I grew up with my parents owning their own business.
Mm.
And I'll say, so this is part of why having a full-time job for the last year has been sort of alluring to me, is that I grew up a lot where I don't remember us having health insurance for most of the part growing up, because it didn't make financial sense with my parents' businesses for them to pay for the like health insurance. They just paid out of pocket, right? But
Mm-hmm.
that bit my mom in the butt. Like, she went through breast cancer and didn't have
Mm.
health insurance, was able to like negotiate with hospitals, being able to like just pay up front with what she could and stuff. I think you're able to make it work, but there's a reason why there's so many people in the United States that go bankrupt from medical bills.
Which is
Um,
insane, but yeah,
yeah, yeah, and
absolutely.
luckily it didn't get quite that bad, because she has her own business and has property and other equity and things, but it's been really, really scary. Seven figures of debt, sort of scary.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like that's definitely been a huge weighing factor on my mind over the last five, plus years or whatever, since this has all happened. So yeah, I'm gonna need to get health insurance. The long and short of it is, I probably will try to like not do no health insurance. I'll figure something out this time.
But I feel like I haven't found out like what they are. I was like, this season I'll probably maybe like, talk to several people who've gone like full time and ask them what they've done. But I feel like even listening to some other podcasts, it's better than it used to be, because both of my parents are also self-employed. So I remember we had to get like insurance through the city somehow. It was like a weird way. It wasn't like your regular Blue Cross Blue Shield. But I feel like nowadays, because there are so many more, like so many entrepreneurs and small businesses, there are more options. Like maybe it's a little bit more expensive than if you were with a big corporation, but at least there are some options out there. So depending on what you're making every month, more than likely you'll find some company that'll allow you to get health insurance from them. But I just figured,
Yeah.
like back in the day, it wasn't like that. I felt like it was you were on your own, or you had to go through the government somehow.
Yeah, well, and one thing I'll say too, at a couple of points in my last few years of working at the agency and then at this job in the last year, because like every year they make you kind of like opt back into some sort of health insurance plan because they tweak things. So I've had a couple of points where I've had the HSA, the health savings account, sort of like high deductible plan.
Mm.
So because I opted in for that because it made sense at whatever particular time when I was working, I have like a few $1,000s in a health savings account that I can only use for health expenses.
Mm.
So that's good. So I mean, that could also be like something to think about if you're like in sort of a full-time job, but you want to like take the leap at some point, maybe doing that sort of plan to sort of like force yourself to save money that can only be used for health stuff,
Right.
like, could be
Yeah.
another, because that will probably, like, when I do end up getting health insurance, I have a feeling that'll probably be something that I go with on my own, because those are usually cheaper, like monthly to pay for. And then you just have to make sure that you're also putting the money aside. But it's like, I'd rather put the money aside so that it's like waiting there for me, that I can use it, versus just paying the higher like monthly premium or whatever. And like, it may or may not be
Yeah.
used. But I don't have
Mm.
kids and I'm pretty healthy. So like, these are all, everybody's situation is so different.
It's just a little different, right? No, thanks for, answering that because I feel like it's for a lot of people, it's like this weird mystery and everybody's like, well, I don't know, so.
Yeah, well, and I like because I have a podcast too, Badass Creatives, and one of the things that I try to get into with a lot of the participants is like the nuts and bolts of things. And so I appreciate you asking me that question because I feel like there's these certain things like how much money are you making, or like what are your income streams, or like health insurance, and like there's certain like taboo things that we just don't talk about, but like that's the stuff that we need to know because nobody talks about it. Like you can't figure it out on your own, or you have to try things and then you mess it up and then you have to like learn from losing money or whatever else.
No, I mean, I always like look for that in podcasts because I'm like, well, I mean, it's so cool. They're like selling this product and they're doing this and that. But I'm like, there's always that other side, this like the creative side is always kind of like glorified. But I'm like, there's that other side. How are they marketing? How are they paying in health insurance? How are they doing thrift savings? Are they able to like live on their own, or did they have to go back and stay with their parents until they got on their feet? It's just like getting like the whole story. So then people know to achieve your dreams, like sometimes you have to make sacrifices, but eventually you'll kind of get where you need to be or want to be with a 6-figure salary a year, or like Pat Flynn status, 6 figures a month. But we'll start with baby steps,
Yeah.
like 6 figures a year, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, so just really, at least I try to like just make sure that people know, hey, it's not going to be easy, and so you got to really make sure that it's something you're passionate about. So when you do have those, months that feel rough, it's okay because you love what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think too, like what I was saying about like my situation of like I don't have kids. I don't have like a ton of debt. I don't have any student loan debt, and I'm super lucky and privileged and grateful for that because I know that's
Mm-hmm.
not the case for a lot of people, right? But like if I think if people are, like younger and they're thinking about maybe going into some sort of freelance thing, it's like a lot of times either like when you're like way younger or way older seems to be these times where people sort of feel like they have more freedom to do that because either they don't have a lot of stuff yet or they don't have kids, or I found that a lot of people find me in my community when they're sort of in this like second part of life where like they're at retirement
Mm-hmm.
age and the kids have left the house and they're sort of like, okay, now I can pursue my creative thing.
Mm-hmm.
But like if you're in that moment where you don't have a lot of baggage, I guess is the best way to put it, like, and you're thinking about doing it, like just give it a shot at least, right?
Yeah, I mean, right. You only have one life. It's like
Yeah.
make a smart choice, but it's like take a risk. Like, so you don't look back 10, 15 years later and wish you had tried.
Yeah, I mean, well, and that's what the last like week and a half or so of my life has taught me, right? Like you can have, and this is stuff that like I knew, and this is I think why I've always been so passionate about being an entrepreneur is I grew up from generations of entrepreneurs. Like my parents had their own business pretty much my entire childhood growing up. And then my mom's parents, they had an antique shop. So like I saw people modeling the behavior of like running their own business. But
Right.
also I graduated before the recession, but I think there's a lot of people sort of in my generation, in the generation like right, behind me or whatever, where it's like we see like even if you have a day job, it's not a guarantee about anything. It's not like we have
Right.
pensions and stuff like the baby
Right.
boomers did.
Right. It's
I
a
mean,
different day. Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, yeah, there's no guarantee in anything. And I feel like, especially with this situation in the last like week or so, I'm just like, I don't know if I ever could work full time for anybody else anymore and like put that trust in them because I can always trust me, right? Like I
Right.
might not always be able to make the best decision, but at least I can own that that was my decision. And if it's wrong, then I can like pivot and figure out the next thing. And I
Right.
have personal responsibility over that versus like being at somebody else's whim.
And then also I wanted to ask you, before I go into some wrap up questions, man, I could like talk to you all day. I'm like, oh, let me get back on task because I could just totally prick your brain for hours. But I think you do a good job of diversifying the different things you offer because one thing that I thought was really cool about you is like You have a book out, you have a podcast, you have a Facebook group, you have the two websites that, you mentioned. And so for you, how did you figure out which products and services were best for you and your business?
So I might have mentioned the term sandbox earlier, but I'm definitely like, I'm an experimenter when it comes to figuring all this stuff out. So, and it's fun for me. Like, it's sort of like gamifying learning, I think is why I do it that way. But there's a lot of trial and error. And even like in some of the products, like the book that I already have, I'm starting to work on my second book, but the book that exists now, so it's called How to Make Money at Craft Shows. And it's all the things that I learned the hard way over many years of doing craft shows from like 2004 to 2014 or so. And it didn't start out as like a fancy self-published book like it looks today if you go on Amazon. So it actually, the beginning of it was from a handful of blog posts that I had written separately, and then started to notice in my Google Analytics, like, oh, I was getting a lot of traffic to all of these 5 or 6 blog posts that were all about craft shows and how I was like setting up my booth or how I was making money. So then I was like, what if I like put them together into like a simple little ebook and kind of repackaged them and tweaked it and added some more information. So I did that and made it just in like a Word doc and saved it as a PDF and sold it on Etsy via their digital downloads.
Mm.
And because that was like the easiest thing for me to do, right? Like to actually do a self-published book like through Amazon seemed way too complicated. So I was like, I'm just going to try this. So I just did that. And then I was like, okay, I did that. That's working. Let me try to figure out how to format it for Kindle so that it can be an ebook so that people can actually read it on their Kindle. So then I just, Google searched and read how to do that. I was like, okay, that wasn't that hard. So I got it on Kindle. And then like a year later, I was like, but I would really like it to be a print book so that I could actually have a physical copy of it. So let me figure out how to actually do that on CreateSpace. So I did. So it's like all this, Google has almost all the answers to like almost
everything. Everything.
Yeah. It's kind of scary actually. But yeah, I just figured it out and I didn't do it all at once and I didn't let it overwhelm me the way that it probably could have if I had tried to tackle it that way. Because there's been other things that I've gotten too much in my head and I was like, I have to make it this huge, giant, amazing thing. But when I can break it down and make it simpler and smaller, that's where I really shine. I have this blog post called the Content Upcycle Method that's about kind of how I've done that with some of my affiliate blog posts that have turned into huge money makers.
Yeah.
But like, there are these posts that started out as these very simple things. And then I saw what was working and I was like, okay, how do I tweak that and see if I can make it work better? And then I would tweak it and then I would see that those things worked. And I just kept like iterating on it, right? It's funny because I've been working in this tech startup space for the last year or so. And there's this thing called lean startup methodology, which is, you start this tech company. You don't need the full bells and whistles of what Airbnb looks like right out of the box. You just need it to be like a very, very simple minimum viable version of that. Right. So just start with where you're at, see if it works, throw some spaghetti against the wall, and then
it's like, hey, either they are going to bite or they're not going to bite. Yeah. And then, but I see too, like you have like even classes on Skillshare. So you are really like, which I love, is like jack of all trades. Let me see what works. How have you liked Skillshare? Because I've thought about Skillshare because I'm like, I'm on Teachable, but I'm like, maybe it's easier to do a platform like Skillshare so you don't have to worry about like the monthly fee and everything is set up for you. There's a built-in audience there.
Yeah. So I'm feeling so much in common with you right now because, so I have one Teachable class that I have that has never really super taken off. Like I've had people buy it and use it and everything. But that was the thing. Like I had this whole, I see people making $100,000 from their online courses. Surely I can do that. And I would get in my head because I would think I needed to teach them everything under the sun about this topic. And it seemed overwhelming and I could never like get finished, right? I would do like an outline and then I would just like never finish it. And I had this one Teachable class and then it was kind of disheartening because it didn't really take off in the way that I wanted it to, even though it took all this time to put together. And then I had my friend Juliette Meeks, who's an artist here in New Orleans that I actually met doing art markets. And now she does a lot of watercolors and stuff. I had her on my podcast and she had started doing Skillshare maybe like a year and a half ago or something. And they reached out to her because they are often soliciting for new teachers. And she was like, well, I'll just try it. And she was telling me on the podcast episode that it turned out to be a more significant revenue stream that she expected it to be. So now she's actually trying to create more Skillshare classes. And I was like,
Mm.
huh, let me look into this.
Interesting. Because I
Yes.
like it because they could be bite sized too. There's no pressure to
Yes.
make them like an hour long. You can do like a 20, 30-minute one, 5, 10 minute chunks of video. It feels doable. Like it's
Yeah.
not something you're like, oh, it's going to take me 6 months to put this together, you know?
Yeah, totally. And
Mm.
so I shortly, like a few weeks or so after I recorded that with her, I had this presentation that I've done a handful of times at different events, and it was about Pinterest, and people kept asking me like, is there an online course for it? So that was kind of the priority one. I was like, I knew that people are interested in this topic. I've talked about it a lot. I kind of have the flow of everything already together. So I feel like basically within like a kind of work throughout the entire weekend, I recorded all the videos. I didn't even have like a fancy camera, even though my partner actually does film and video for a living. I was just like, if I try to like bring somebody else in, it's never going to get done. So I literally did it with like the webcam on my MacBook and with my Blue Yeti mic that I use for my podcast recording. I just recorded it, and then I did like, screen flow stuff for some of it too, and some slides and everything. I edited it in iMovie, and I got that thing up within the weekend. And yeah, it's like my only paid class that I have on there currently live. I have one free class as well. But I'm
Mm.
actually in the midst of editing some other stuff. I'm actually going to take some of that teachable stuff that I had put together already and turn that into multiple Skillshare classes that I'm currently working on getting out there. So yeah, I'm into Skillshare. You should try it.
Yeah, yeah, because I'm like, I've had this Teachable for a while, and the only thing I've done is like a kind of inbox zero course, but I'm like, I'm going to do some other courses. And I'm like, for some reason, I haven't done it. And I feel like I I mean, I can make it like small and digestible like you can for Skillshare, but for some reason Teachable feels bigger to me. And I'm like, maybe I should just do a couple for Skillshare, see how that feels, and if those take off, then I'll just let the Teachable die unless for some reason I need to like do a larger class. So it's great hearing like your perspective on it. And then,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
um
Well, in Skillshare, more people can find you too, because it's kind of like, think like Etsy. It's like a marketplace where people can actually discover your stuff through Skillshare as well.
No, and that's what I was thinking too, because for a while I was selling laser cut handmade light switch plates, which I know it sounds really weird, but the maker space that where I was making them closed, so I can't make them anymore. But at the time I started, even though I had like my own website, it's like right, I still had them on Etsy because Etsy already has like that market there, right? And so at least you could start to like gain some interest and then possibly pull them over to your website to get them on your newsletter. But you want to take advantage of like things that already have like a big huge customer set. So you have inspired me to create a Skillshare course.
Cool. I want a full report once you do.
And then just one more question before I just get to a couple of the wrap up questions is, since you do experiment with a lot of different things like Skillshare, affiliate marketing, creating a book and so forth, for you, what have you found to be the most profitable?
So the affiliate marketing stuff is one of my things, but it took me a really long time to get there. So, and it fluctuates. So it's not something that I could like rely on to pay my rent. So in that one post, the content upcycle method, there's one blog post that I have that I created called Funny White Elephant Gifts that's super holiday specific. So it spikes a lot during the holiday season. And then I have
Mm,
other posts that will make money throughout the year. So for instance, when it hit the kind of like peak of like the traffic and everything, which was mostly a mix of traffic from Pinterest and traffic from Google organic search. So December 2016, I want to say, I made from Amazon associates it was over $6,000 that month. And the majority of it, probably like at least 70%, was from that one post of the
oh
Funny White
wow.
Elephant Gifts. And that's my take home. That's not actually what Amazon, like what the revenue from Amazon, like if I look in the back end, it was like basically I sold like 20 grand worth of stuff or
I know.
something,
Like, right,
like 30 grand worth of stuff,
right.
which is insane to me. Now, so
Yeah.
it spiked, and then the next year I was like, oh, what am I gonna make like this December? It's amazing. The next year it was like 3 grand in December, and then last year it was maybe like somewhere between like 12 and 15. But
Oh,
then
wow.
throughout the year, because I have all these other posts, I have like craft show related posts and some other stuff that's still out there. And my website, and I don't put a lot of effort into my website anymore. I need to go back in there and kind of fix, clean some things up and make sure everything's fresh. But I've been really lazy with my website, and it's still like on an average month throughout the rest of the year brings in somewhere between like 100 and 300, and then it spikes to, like a few hundred to maybe 1,000 October through November, or October through December in the last year or
Mm.
two.
No, that's
Um,
amazing.
there's that. And then I've been moving towards doing more speaking. So then also, as far as speaking right
Oh,
now, for
yeah.
me, the most profitable thing has been when I do my own events. So I
Mm.
held what I called an accelerator. It was sort of a weekend retreat where I went real deep and taught a bunch of search engine optimization and social media marketing and brand strategy to a handful of creative business owners. And I also did some before work where I really audited what they were doing and gave recommendations that were specific to each of them. And then we're doing some wrap up consulting calls with each of them one-on-one. So it's this kind of packaged retreat weekend. Something like that has been one of the more profitable things I've done. So it's been a lot of like me creating the things, whether it's online or
Yeah.
whether it's creating events for me to speak and teach at.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if, because I know, because you just started your podcast, correct?
It's actually this year is, or this July is the 1 year anniversary of it.
Is
So,
it? Oh, okay.
but it's not weekly. So it started out. I would love to be more consistent than I am, but sometimes life gets in the way. So when I
Okay.
started out, my goal was to be weekly, and I was weekly for the first like 5 or 6 months, and then so some personal life stuff came up, and I was editing everything myself, and got a little off track. And then when I started the new year, I decided to switch to primarily the interviews, because when I started, I was flipping back and forth between an interview episode and a solo episode. And so since January, it's mostly just been the interview episodes, although I might bring some solo ones back occasionally, but it's primarily the interviews. And then I had gotten really busy with my day job, which was paying my bills great. And I wanted to work
Right.
on this second book that I've started. So I'd started working with a podcast editor more recently, and in the transition of trying to outsource that. That the schedule has gotten spread out a little bit. So it hasn't been exactly like every 2 weeks. It's been a little bit more like every 3 or 4 weeks on some points.
Now
But
it's a lot.
hopefully
People don't realize it's like a lot of work.
it's
Yeah.
so much work, especially the interviews. Actually, I love interviews because I my favorite podcasts that I listen to are almost all interviews. I don't listen to a lot of single person podcasts.
Mm.
So that's my
Hmm.
favorite as far as both me creating them and as far as listening to other people's podcasts. But it's a lot of work because there's just all this extra stuff that you have to do versus when I'm just recording me talking by myself.
Right, right. Now, very cool. Well, just a few wrap up questions, and thank you for letting me pick your brain. Um, how do you stay motivated?
Um, I'm usually pretty good at kind of self motivation, just because I'm just like I'm excited about life, and like
Right.
life's really short. But when I have those moments, I've been doing a lot of like self care work this year because, like I said, I've gone through some personal stuff in the last 6 months to a year. And so I've been trying to do more of like a not every day, but like a lot of days throughout the week, like a yoga practice, which is literally like me using an at home yoga app on my phone for like 15 to 20 minutes most days.
Right.
Um, just like some more mindfulness and trying to keep myself in a good headspace and positivity.
Mm. And what's like one thing you can't live without?
Um, so I was thinking about this question before we got on the phone, and I feel like lately I'm kind of obsessed with Spotify and music because I've realized
Mm.
like how much I missed dancing and how much I had gotten away from and had missed the lip syncing from like when I was doing drag regularly. I actually, on the way home from work today, I was like, I'm gonna put on my Spotify instead of my audiobook, and I'm gonna lip sync in the car. And I was lip syncing the I was like going crazy doing some Bernadette Peters, like some people from Gypsy in the car. I'm sure anybody that saw me thought I was a nutcase, but it was amazing.
No, hey, you having fun.
Yeah.
And then please tell the listeners like the best places to find you.
Yeah. So the podcast is Badass Creatives, and you can listen to it pretty much anywhere you can find podcast, including Spotify. And the website is badasscreatives.com, and there's an Instagram, Badass Creatives. And then I am at missmalaprop.com, MISSMALAPROP.com. You can also use my name, MalloryWhitfield.com will redirect to that website. And then I'm on Instagram at Mallory.Whitfield is my personal Instagram handle. And I'm on almost all of the channels.
Right.
I don't Twitter very often. I miss Malaprop on there, but if you are super into Twitter, you can find me on there. Yeah.
Well, perfect. Thank you for being so kind of open and honest. I know this will be really just kind of like eye opening and inspirational for people who are trying to figure out that next step and like understanding too. I think this is a great episode. Like, yeah, I was even thinking about like, oh, cool titles for it because it's like all these different pivots, right? But that's life, you know? You do these
Yeah.
pivots until you find your thing. And depending where you are in life, too, something that worked in your 20s might not work in your 30s. And so, you know, that's a good time to like reevaluate and then go in a different direction. And so I think you're like a perfect example of that. And it's just kind of like, gotten you to like this really cool place where you're doing all this amazing stuff like speaking, teaching, and everything. So I can't wait to stalk you online and see all the cool stuff you're going to do the next year.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Thank you, Mallory, for being so truthful and honest about your journey. I feel as though a lot of people will be able to relate to it and know that it's okay to pivot. You know, I feel like sometimes we're told we have to stay in one place forever. And it's like, no, you do what's right for you and you kind of have to follow your heart. Anyway, if you go over to the show notes, nachesnow.com/63, I have all the links that Mallory mentioned. She had a ton of stuff in there, a couple of places in London, the New Orleans French Market, the New Orleans Drag Workshop. I have her links in there to the FEMA outfit that allowed her to win third place on Etsy. So you guys could see that, to her book, How to Make Money at Craft Shows, and her upcycle method blog posts, and even her Skillshare classes. So I've got all the links, all the things over there. And I've also included a link to information about a health savings account, the National Speakers Association conference, and she also mentioned Gretchen Rubin and the Four Tendencies. So if that sounded interesting to you and you want to dig in a little bit more, I have a link to Gretchen's website. So I hope this was inspirational for you and it helps you figure out when you need to pivot, or maybe you're where you need to be. I don't know. But hopefully it got you thinking. All right. I will catch you guys next week and I hope you all had an amazing holiday weekend. Take care. Bye.